His Excellency Mr. Kitak Lim, Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization and Chancellor of the World Maritime University. Her Excellency Ms. Ine Eriksson Soride, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Norway. Mr. Guy Platon, Secretary General, International Chamber of Shipping. Mr. Amitabh Kumar, Director General of Shipping, the Government of India. Dr. Malini Shankar, Vice Chancellor, Indian Maritime University. Ms. Sangham Gupta, Sitara Shipping. All protocols observed. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As I looked at the title of the panel discussion, Education and Training to Solve the Challenges of Tomorrow, I could not help but think what a loaded topic it is. It assumes a certainty of knowledge about tomorrow that I dare say nobody on the planet has today. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly shown this to us. While the awareness of the potential disaster of a pandemic has been obvious for decades, very few people, if many, would have predicted in the middle of 2019 what 2020 was going to be like. This is one of the greatest dilemmas of all education and training. Modern-day education and training purport to prepare students for future decades ahead of them, with skill sets that are often based on educational paradigms, with roots in history and tradition, and existing practices. This is all well and good when change is minimal and smoothly incremental, and when traditional skills persist. In a fast-changing economy, transient phenomena, sudden disruptive forces, and drivers such as fast-changing technology and environmental change, as well as increased uncertainty about anticipated skills needed, education and training face some of their biggest challenges. In the extreme, this has led to very cynical remarks, such as that articulated by Malcolm Muggeridge, who calls education tongue-in-cheek, the great mumbo-jumbo and fraud of the age purporting to equip us to live, and is prescribed as a universal remedy for everything from juvenile delinquency to premature senility. If we are to avoid education indeed being this great mumbo-jumbo, we have to be carefully consider what it is we are trying to do when we seek to educate, when we seek to train and build as well as develop human capacity. How do we educate and train to solve the challenges of tomorrow, when to a large extent we can only make guesstimates of what tomorrow will bring? I will premise my discussion today on our best estimates of the challenges the future holds and is most likely to bring. Sustainability of the planet vis-a-vis an increasing population that demands more goods and services, and the rapid advancement of technology and its juxtaposition with labor and skills development are primary in this respect. In any national maritime and oceans endeavor, what has been called the human element is significant and should be at the forefront of discussions. This is true whether we are speaking of maritime or ocean industries, fishing, ports, shipping, logistics, offshore drilling, all have to be underpinned by well-trained, well-educated people. Indeed, it can be argued that the problems of underutilization and lack of stewardship, respect, protection, and sustainable use of the oceans in many jurisdictions arise from a lack of knowledge and appropriate education and training about the ocean and how humanity should interact with it. Education and training, while being different in meaning, are not necessarily mutually exclusive, often having minor to major aspects of each definition in different curricula and programs. It is worth pointing out that education and training should not always be directed at filling existing jobs, and this is even more the case in our fast-changing world. Forecasts suggest that many of the jobs currently available will be obsolete only in a few years, and many jobs will be required in the future, and they do not exist today. Rapidly changing technology and globalization mean that it is imperative that maritime education in particular, as opposed to maritime training, is geared to imparting knowledge and changing attitudes that support the creation of jobs through an entrepreneurial and sustainable mindset. It is certainly not enough, and may even be short-sighted, to educate tomorrow's industry actors and maritime leaders based solely on the past and present labor markets. The dynamic interrogation of future possibilities gives many opportunities to all countries and organizations for development via a well-educated cadre of people engaged in finding innovative solutions for the pressing needs of today and those that are anticipated for the future. In this regard, technology could be a significant ally. Specifically, technology has increased the massification and access to education. E-learning, in particular, allows significantly diverse populations to access relatively good education. While all these need technological infrastructure, such as internet connectivity, the possibilities are truly extensive. At WMU, we extended the reach of our capacity building efforts quite some time ago with several distance learning, postgraduate programs, and a Master's in International Maritime Law delivered completely online. WMU's vision is to reach as many as possible, and this is being increasingly enhanced with technology, whether with synchronous blended learning or with asynchronous learning systems. This has been made easier by the fact that the university's academic offerings are focused on higher education at the postgraduate level. Our programs, mainly in the areas of management, administration, law and policy, limit the need for laboratory and other practical work, and tend to allow for delivery in an online environment. I note that other universities, especially those which directly train seafarers, have a curriculum based on STCW IMO's Convention 1978 as amended that makes practical training essential and imposes challenges to online training. Nevertheless, even in those contexts, one sees an increasing relevance of practical e-learning tools, including cloud-based simulation and the use of virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, in order to increase the possibilities of training in an online environment. All of these efforts, which have been progressively developing over decades, have seen a significant catalyzing effect from COVID-19, this tremendous pandemic. What was deemed impossible only a few months ago is now being made possible. It is astounding that individuals and organizations, what they can do when they are confronted, or we are confronted, with existential threats. Having said this, one must acknowledge that technology-mediated solutions are not the be-all and end-all of everything. Technology poses threats to many facets of human life, not least the fraying of social interaction, on which a lot of human development is based. Education and training systems must take cognizance of this when seeking to implement their visions of educational improvements with technology. With reference to the future and the challenges that we face, the responsible, ethical, and optimum use of technology to benefit the world's population with all of its diversity should be kept in view all the time. Another challenge is that of developing a global consciousness for a sustainable planet. I mentioned previously that it is astounding what individuals and organizations will do when confronted with existential threats. Perhaps it is necessary to point out that one can make such a statement regarding short-term existential threats. I say this because when it comes to long-term existential threats, such as those posed by the pollution of the oceans, the deforestation, climate change, and other such matters related to the sustainability of the planet, humanity has shown and continues to show levels of apathy that are not in agreement with the urgency of the situation. The global community as a whole continues to increase the culture of consumerism, waste, and inordinate use of the Earth's limited resources. This remains a significant challenge for all of us. With only a decade to go to 2030, most of the targets of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have not been met. It is my position that one of the keys to addressing these challenges is better education and training that is accessible to a wider community and builds a sustainability mindset and skills that are needed for adaptability and resilience. Technology enhances the possibilities of doing this on a global scale, and it needs to be fashioned by all stakeholders to play their key role. There are problems facing the maritime industry that should be addressed. Among others, better maritime education and training. And here I use the term maritime education and training in its wider context and not in the narrow sense of seafarer education and training. The wider maritime community beyond seafarers need comprehensive education, both cognitive and affective, in policy, law, optimum management, and in administration. While there is a tendency to focus on only cognitive technical know-how, it is indeed essential that effective education is also addressed. You must have noticed, as an example, the tendency to ask for seafarers to have one or other additional element of training when the industry faces a crisis. When security became an issue in shipping, training for security was added to the portfolio of the already long list of things the seafarer has to become competent in and therefore educated and trained for. They became ship security officers. In other industries, this did not happen. Aviation, for example, just had more de facto security personnel employed in airports and sometimes on planes. Interestingly, one notices the same thing happening in relation to the effect of COVID-19 and the effect and impact it has had on shipping. In response to the horrific situation, the generally speaking states and industry action, or rather inaction, has had on seafarers' welfare. There have been calls for seafarers to be trained to be more psychologically resilient at an individual level. It is rather the wider maritime community and relevant stakeholders who have to be educated to create the systems and contexts where the seafarer does not need to have training to be mentally resilient and on how to avoid suicide. After all, when seafarers go to sea, they go to a work environment, as any normal person should, and not to war. Nevertheless, this state of abuse continues right across the maritime industry, and leaders who should know much better continue to subject their subordinates to inordinate levels of task performance, while at the same time exposing values to the contrary. All of us, particularly in high-level management, need the kind of education and reflection that goes beyond technical expertise to values of empathy, emotional intelligence, compassion, and awareness of others' rights. In all of this, the vision of WMU as IMO's apex education and training institution and a postgraduate institution in addition is to offer an educational context which supports the development of knowledgeable, empathetic, and innovative thinkers. At WMU, the leaders of tomorrow, be they involved in national administrations, creating legislation, shipbuilding, human resource management, education and training, management of ships or ports, and irrespective of age, nationality, and gender, they can build an appreciation of current issues, develop the ability to respectfully but critically interrogate different perspectives, elicit and analyze diverse opinions, and create a network for ongoing international dialogue. By definition and by history, WMU brings different and diverse stakeholders together to critically examine the issues that will impact on or even define the future, and to start the process of consensus seeking among the leaders and change agents of tomorrow. The university recognizes that the challenge of sustainability requires all hands to be on deck, and that includes every single person on the planet. That awareness should drive collaborative efforts across the board and use rather than abuse the diversity that we inherently all have, our uniqueness as individuals and as communities, to enhance our own survivability. Of course, wherever you have uniqueness of thought and vision expressed without regard to community, there is a potential for chaos. 7 billion diverse people, each doing their own thing, will be a nightmare for global consensus. The challenge is to have diversity as expressed individually and or in local communities. Mesh that together in an equitable way that advances global goals, underpinned by appropriate values. Meeting this challenge starts with mutual respect and the consideration and the shared appreciation of challenges that humanity faces. This is, by and large, best facilitated by or achieved through optimum education at all levels. Among other things, technology, such as evidenced in e-learning, allows the reaching of larger and more diverse groups of people with optimum education while continuing a discourse on limiting its real and potential negative effects as a whole. In this respect, WMU strives to foster a paradigm of lifelong learning mediated by technology in support of the goals of the United Nations. Goal 4 of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development emphasizes that quality education and lifelong learning opportunities must be inclusive and equitable. One cannot speak of inclusivity and equity without, of course, addressing Goal 5 on gender equality. In keeping with that goal, WMU is focused on increasing female student enrollment, as well as the contribution of women to academic and management roles. I am pleased to note that there has been continuous improvement in this respect over the last decade, both at WMU itself and in the wider maritime community, with women's increasing participation as competent contributors in the maritime industry and beyond. In conclusion, I take this opportunity to assure you that WMU, as an expression of the International Maritime Organization's technical cooperation strategy, and in support of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that we are positioned and willing to assist and support to the greatest extent possible the capacity building efforts of all relevant and well-meaning stakeholders through enhanced and lifelong maritime and oceans education and training where necessary and beneficial, using appropriate technology. Wishing you the very best for the conference. I thank you.